Start 'em, sit 'em with Michael F. Florio. Go to NFL.com/startsit to see all the work that he has gone into painstakingly giving you the starts and sits for everybody on your fantasy roster. And we'll start with the quarterbacks, as is customary. With one Brock Purdy, are we starting Brock after he was the QB2 in Week 13?
MV Purdy. That's what you got to call this guy right now. And, I mean, he is putting up monstrous fantasy numbers. I know he disappointed against Seattle a couple weeks ago because he didn't have to throw the ball against them, but 23 or more fantasy points and 3 or more touchdowns in 3 of his 4 games this month. Seattle has allowed the 3rd most passing touchdowns. I mean, given the state of the quarterback position and how well he's playing, what are you going to do, sit him?
Yeah, not doing it. The MV Purdy. You heard it here first. Let's get to Herbo. Again, they scored 6 points. They won, but they only scored 6 points. Are we starting Justin Herbert in Week 14?
This pains me to say, but I think you can sit Justin Herbert this week. Not a must sit, but fewer than 14 in 2 straight and 4 of his last 7, he has become a boom or bust quarterback. But since Week 5, no quarterback has scored 18 fantasy points against the Broncos. And in that span, they played Mahomes twice, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud. Jordan Love is the only one to throw multiple passing touchdowns against them in that span. So you could play Brock Purdy over him. You could play Russell Wilson potentially over him. And I even think that quarterback we're about to talk about, you could start over Herbert with confidence this week.
Tough for Justin Herbert, but that does lead us to one Jordan Love, who's now a top 10 quarterback season long in fantasy. Are we starting him in Week 14?
We are starting Jordan Love. Not only is he top 10 on the year, he has been amazing in the last month. Since Week 10, he is averaging 22 fantasy points per game, nearly 290 passing yards per game with multiple passing touchdowns in every one of those. And he adds points with his legs in that span. Top 5 in yards, touchdowns, pass rating, and EPA. And the Giants, they've allowed a QB1 in 2 of their last 3 games. You got it, right? He's so hot right now, you have to get him in your line.
Yeah, we love Love right now, which takes me back to
Love wins.
a couple of years ago where it's like, this guy's never chill on early declarations on quarterbacks. As we get to the running backs, Austin Eckler. We're sitting Justin Herbert. Are we sitting Austin Eckler?
I know it's been a disappointing year so far for Austin Eckler, but I still think you have to keep rolling with your first-round pick this year. So many of you are wondering what to do with him, but the Broncos have allowed the most fantasy points per game. They struggle again on the ground and through the air against running backs, and we know Austin Eckler can thrive in both. 6 or more targets in 4 of his last 5. He is a lock for double-digit carries. He is the 2nd most goal line carries in the NFL, so even with the down metrics, with the speed being down, with the performances being down as of late, volume and the matchup make him someone that you have to start once again this week.
Still starting Austin Eckler. Good for, hopefully, good things coming for Austin Eckler. Dameon Pierce outscored Devin Singletary last week. Almost doubled him up. Are we starting him this week?
I am sitting Dameon Pierce, and I want the Texans to just pick one running back. But this past week, we saw Pierce scored a touchdown. He had around 10 fantasy points. He had more carries than Devin Singletary, but Singletary played more snaps, had more involvement in the passing game. When they're both getting work like this, the floor for each is so low, and the ceiling is not that much higher. Without a touchdown, I think you could be looking at 5-6 fantasy points out of each of them, so I would just sit them both right now on your bench and banks.
All right, out of there. No Texans running backs for Michael F. Florio. We like Dolphins running backs, especially this one. But sometimes the results have varied. Are we starting in Week 14?
Texas running back right here. We are starting Devon Achane. You start both Miami Dolphins running backs without question. And I know the internet likes to argue over who's the lead back here. It doesn't matter. In the 4 games that they have played together, 4 full games, they've split snaps, they've split carries, they've split targets, with Achane actually having a slight edge there. In those 4 games, he has scored 21 or more every time and is averaging 31 fantasy points per game. Mostert averages a measly 20 per game in that span. They're going to run wild on Tennessee. Must start both of them every week.
Smash start for the Miami Dolphins tailback. In fact, both of them. You want more starts and sits, wide receivers and tight ends coming up, but more quarterbacks and running backs for you. We're riding with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Sits for Geno and Matt Stafford. Starting Zach Moss, and A.J. Dillon makes his way into the Congratulations, A.J. Kareem Hunt and Khalil. With Tyler Lockett, are we starting them against the 49ers defense?
What could go wrong sitting a Seahawks wide receiver, right? Like Tyler Lockett, though, has become very boom or bust. Fewer than 10 in 3 straight and 7 of his last 10. The Niners held him to 3 catches and 30 yards just 2 weeks ago, and he has struggled against zone, and they use zone a whole bunch. So, yeah, You could play DK Metcalf this week, but Tyler Lockett should hit your bench in fantasy.
All right, we'll leave Lockett and the Seahawks, and we'll go to Jayden Reed. We saw you wishing him to get loaded up. Are you wishing that because you think you should sit him, or are we doing that because he's a smash start?
I think he is a start this week. He has shown us to have a safe floor already in fantasy with 11 or more fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 games, but Christian Watson is banged up, which could mean even more volume going to Jayden Reed. We know he'll be involved as a pass catcher. He'll be involved in the running game. He's basically Wisconsin Deebo Samuel, and the Giants have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so safe floor could have an elevated ceiling this week as well.
I think Green Bay Packers, I think the legendary YouTube video, Greg Jennings with the team on his back, a guy who had all of fantasy on his back early in the season was Adam Thielen. Now we're kind of wondering, are we starting him?
He broke his leg, though. We're going to sit Adam Thielen in this one. Look, Adam Thielen was awesome earlier in this season, but in 4 games without Frank Reich calling the plays, he has averaged less than 8 fantasy points per game. Last week, he was 3rd amongst Panthers receivers in yards and fantasy points. Jonathan Mingo is getting more involved in this offense. They're trying to get the rookie there going. There's not as much opportunities, not as many scoring opportunities in Carolina. I think you could safely put Adam Thielen back on the bench.
Thielen goes to the bench, and let's go to some wide receivers because the Philadelphia Eagles, they were running all sorts of sideways, Howie gets on the phone to Shaq Leonard. He's like, hey, we need help over here. Is that going to change things for Jake Ferguson against Philly?
Shaq Leonard is a run stopper. He is not a coverage linebacker. Get Jake Ferguson into your starting lineup. Not only have the Eagles allowed the second most yards to the middle portion of the field, and Ferguson has the 2nd most targets on the Cowboys, behind only CeeDee Lamb in the middle section of the field. Plus, touchdown or over 12 fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games. This could be a very, very high-scoring game with the division on the line. I think you want to start a whole bunch of people in this game, including Jake Ferguson.
All right, let's go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. We don't know yet. It looks like it's unlikely that Trev's going to start. So it's C.J. Beathard. Does that mean we change how we feel about Evan Ingram?
I wrote this on Monday before Trevor Lawrence got hurt. I think you sit Evan Ingram because of the matchup against the Browns. Last week, I know he had a big game. He went from the best matchup for a tight end against the Bengals to the worst against the Browns. They've allowed by far the fewest yards to tight ends, the fewest fantasy points. Mark Andrews is the only one to go over 8 fantasy points against them, and it's like half the yards and touchdowns they've allowed to tight ends has gone to Mark Andrews. So they have been shutting down the position all year. Now with a backup quarterback, it's just another reason to put Evan Ingram, who usually brings a safe floor. That gets lowered this week. Put him back in the bench.
All right, so maybe take a shot if you've got Evan Ingram and go get a tight end that you think might take that ceiling up. Let's get some more starts and sits at wide receiver. DJ Moore, Nico Collins, both starts. Chris Godwin and George Pickens sits. Taysom Hill, also a start. And Jake Ferguson as well. And then there's Johnson and Higbee sits at the tight end positions.